Now, they say that size doesn't matter, but it does seem to matter quite a lot to the toy industry. So you can get an alien queen that is this size, and you can get an alien queen that is this size and does this. But why is that? Why do we have all these options for character sizes? Why do we have so many different varieties of action figures at different scales? Let's have a think about it, shall we? Now, as daft as this may sound, I don't quite know the point that I want to make in doing this video. So you might ask, why am I doing it? It's a perfectly fair question. I haven't been getting loads and loads of action figures, despite what this little collection here might suggest. But in picking up the ones that I have picked up, it's very, very apparent that over the course of time, the size of these figures has sort of shifted somewhat, although in many respects not radically. And it then occurred to me, sort of, why these sizes in particular? You know, why were these picked as a thing? Why didn't they settle on a universal action figure size? And one thing that immediately springs to mind is because they want to sell their own stuff. By which I mean, if every toy company produced an action figure at the same size, they would all be compatible with one another to a large degree. And if you think about what that means, it means that if you buy a vehicle for one type of figure, it would be compatible with all the figures from another range. And of course that means that you might not buy as many big vehicles for those figures as you would do for the other range, because you've already got some that would fit them. So actually, I wonder to what extent that's an actual conscious decision on the part of the toy companies to make sure that the figures that they produce are always slightly different sizes to other people's, in order that they can then produce vehicles dedicated to their range so that they don't fit with anyone else's range. Does that make sense? I hope so. And when I was going through that thought process, it occurred to me that the one type of toy that's exempt from that is this one. Because Sideswipe here, being a Transformer, is his own vehicle. So actually, the Transformers as a toy line were able to have whatever size they wanted as standard, not just because they were borrowing from other people's designs originally, sure, but because actually, fundamentally, they make their own vehicles. They don't, generally speaking, ride around in other Transformers, so they don't need to worry about that. So actually, Sideswipe here can be whatever size he feels like, because he can transform and get around by himself. So for Transformers, that probably wasn't as big a consideration as for others. But I would still call him an action figure. And whilst I'm thinking on that, in terms of action figures, what I'm thinking of here is figures that have some degree of articulation and are intended to battle with other figures. So basically, not figurines, not things that are static, not things that are just models, but things that are designed to have play value to them. Because otherwise, I think, you're looking at all sorts of stuff and then, the arguments kind of go away. But I'm sort of thinking in terms of, the stuff that is intended to get bashed about with and can hold weapons. So let's just think about that for a moment. Because you can see here, a few of these figures, sorry, I've lost my focus. A number of these figures are designed to either hold, or indeed in the Centurions case, wear weapons. Because they are action figures, so they're designed to be in battles with other action figures. perfectly fair enough. So in order for that to work, and again, in order for them to have a unique quality to them so that they can only hold weapons from their range, all their hands have got to be of a certain type to accommodate a certain diameter of weapon. So if we take Bucky here, so Bucky I happen to pick up with all of his weapons, that circumference of sort of holster, well not holster, grip if you like, is going to be unique to him. He's only he can really get his hands around that, unless you happen to find someone else who can hold that size. But even then, of course, Luke here is not going to be able to get his hand anywhere near that. That's not going to work. So that's a tick in the box from a toy company's point of view, because it means, only he can hold that. Therefore, kids can't use it for anything else. Therefore, they've got to buy my stuff. As you can see, he has got quite a big. I have to say, that's actually quite a sensible kind of way for a figure to hold something, because very difficult to break that. And he holds his guns very, very, very convincingly. I can't even remember who produced this. But he's got a little bit of articulation as Bucky. But let's just think about sizes now, because to my mind, they've increased over time, broadly speaking. So, for example, I've got this guy lurking off to one side here, because I'm not quite sure he's really an action figure. But he's a rather striking fellow who I've never actually shown you before, I don't think. This is an Evangelion Eva. This was a Diamond Select action figure. He's got good articulation. He can hold stuff. If I had a gun for him, I imagine that a gun could be held by him. Just notice his fist is in a strange position there. But he is considerably taller than average. He's quite difficult to stand up as well. But he's sort of, and I say that, and yet he's not actually as tall as the Centurion, which is curious. But I think if he was properly stood up, he probably would be. But again, he's still head and shoulders above, say, a Luke Skywalker. So you put a Luke Skywalker in there, and he's literally just coming up to his hips. That's it. So things have moved on. But I think what I'm going to do now is let me just show you some examples of what I mean by this sort of range. Okay, so this is actually in centimetres. But let's just have a look at this. Now, if I start them off... let me start them off at the top here. So top left. So Luke is about 10 centimetres tall. Now, let's say it's 2.5 centimetres to an inch. So he's nearly 4 inches. So I think generally it's perceived as being 3 3/4 inch for Star Wars figures. So I guess if he was absolutely on the 10 centimetre line, his helmet doesn't come quite to the top. So he's about 3 3/4 inch. I take this Toy Biz Batman, late 80s, and I lie him down there. We can see that he's quite a bit longer. So he's, if I ignore his pointy bat ears, he's about 13 centimetres. So he's a little bit longer. A little bit taller, I should say. So that would put him, by my reckoning, at about the 5 inch mark. So 5 inches would be 12.5 centimetres. So he's about 5 inches. So that's quite a sort of a jump. If I put side swipe down, he's a little bit shorter than Batman. So he's only about 11.5 inches, 11.5 centimetres tall. So again, there's no sort of consistency across those randomly picked three at all. And let's put Sideswipe back, as he's not strictly a sort of a normal action figure in the sense that he's got an alternate form. So let's put this Pirates of Dark Water in. Now he is more standard. He's more sort of the Batman size. So he's about the 12.5 centimetre size again. So again, sort of 5 inch kind of figure. But then we get someone like Ace McCloud here, and Ace, of course, is going to throw a spanner in the works. because he's huge. He's still an 80s toy, whereas Batman there is verging on the 90s, early 90s. But Ace here is huge. If I sort of close him up a touch there, that's basically, he's not lying very flat, so that's not very scientific of me, I'm sorry. But if I hold him horizontal, we're getting down towards the 18.5 centimetre mark. So 18.5 centimetres, I should have bought a calculator. So that's quite a few inches. He's, how much did I say? 18.5. So I would think that he's got to be at least 8 inches. 8 times 2.5. 16. Yeah, maybe a little under that, but he's well beyond some of the others. Now, the question is he an action figure or is he something slightly different? You know, I'm not quite sure. There were clearly larger doll type figures who maybe, you know, there's another argument for, I don't know. But again, like the Transformers, when you stop and think about it, the Centurions were not designed to go into vehicles because they are their own vehicles. So they attach mobility elements to themselves and then you play with them. So again, they don't need to fit inside vehicles. So I guess that's one of the defining characteristics of which size you're going to go for. It's, do they need to fit into something else? Because of course, the Star Wars figures invariably were going to be sold with a view to them going into other vehicles, which they didn't necessarily come with. So you had to have the figures separately before you could put them into vehicles. So, you know, good selling technique. But that is predisposed towards the fact that your figures are of a certain size where they're going to be able to be compatible with vehicles. Now, Visionaries would actually be a good example of that, but he's sat in his vehicle. Let me just try a little experiment here. If you'll just bear with me for a moment, I might just pause. Okay, so here's a Visionary sat inside his vehicle. And now I wonder who of these figures could actually fit inside this vehicle. I still need to figure out if I can get his proper hologram, but anyway. Now let's just measure him up while he's here, because I actually don't know how big they went for with the Visionaries. He is well, he's just over 11 centimetres. So that puts him in the sort of 4-inch kind of bracket, but a little bit more. So Batman is taller than him by a good margin, but by the same token, he's bigger than Luke Skywalker by a reasonable margin. So he's sort of in between. So again, there's no consistency there. But interestingly, what the Visionary does have is articulation. And you're going to need flexible knees to fit in this vehicle, because that's kind of the way it's rigged. So if your knees can't bend, can I, for example, get a Luke Skywalker in here? And interestingly, of course, I can, because he's smaller. But actually, that doesn't look daft at all. So he would have fit into a Visionary size vehicle, which means, again, you know, you don't necessarily have to go out and buy Visionaries for it. You can just put any figure in there. So, you know, you can imagine the sort of the wailing and gnashing of teeth. But equally, if I now try and put the Batman figure in, which I noted was bigger, will he fit in there? Now, you're going to say to me, well, yes, he does. And yeah, he kind of does. But I doubt the canopy would close over his head, because he's got pointy ears, which admittedly wouldn't help. But you can see he's not really wanting to sit there. He's kind of leaning quite a lot. So you can sort of get him to sit down in it, but I think that once the canopy is on there, and I would put the canopy on, but it's so to make it stay in place, but it's going to be too big, basically. He's not going to be able to close it down on top of himself, which is a shame, but not from the toy company's point of view, because that's kind of what they want, isn't it? You know, the toy company isn't going to want you to be able to interlink everything really, really easily. That's not what they're after. So, yeah, I mean, it's just one of those videos where I just sort of thought it's kind of curious, because I guess part of it is down to price, part of it is down to presentation, and let's just talk about presentation for a moment, because, whoops, there goes the pirate. It's had too much mead, or whatever it was the pirates drank. Now then, let's just think about this from a presentational point of view. So, if we look at the size of these packets here, if I clear the loose figures out of the way. So, Sequest DSV on the left there. Now, that's Bridger. He's got quite a few accessories with him. They're all sort of clearly displayed in front of him. But he's a relatively small figure. Let me quickly measure him up. I would say he is at about that sort of 4-inch kind of mark. So he's about 11 centimetres. So he's sort of 4 inches there and thereabouts. And I'm sure people will already be telling me in the chat what they consider the standards to be. And I imagine it is inches rather than centimetres, you know, because, I mean, I'm a sort of metric kind of guy in that sense. Even though, ironically, the UK isn't terribly metric, generally speaking, but, you know, that's a whole different video, I suppose. But if we're looking at sort of shelf presence, it's kind of what do you actually want to achieve? Is a bigger figure actually better from the point of view of making an impact on a toy shelf? You know, you want to draw people's eye in, but of course a lot of that is to do with the size of the card as well. So you can see the Sequest DSV card is much shorter than the Babylon 5 card, and this thing just weighs a ton. But interestingly, they all stand up by themselves, and they've all been designed because the Sequest DSV card specifically has a little foot just there in the middle, centre of gravity, to actually support it and be freestanding. So you don't need to put it on an actual rack. It can actually just support itself. But they're all going to take up a lot of space, of course, because they've all got accessories. And they've chosen to put Wolverine's claws and arm out to one side there, I think to demonstrate that it can do that as much as anything else, which again makes perfect sense. And of course, you know, articulation is a whole different video, I suppose, in and of itself, isn't it? Because, well, you know, I don't know what people would consider as standard articulation these days at all, because I haven't picked up very many modern action figures, but I guess elbows, knees, ankles, hands, chest even, which as people who watch my videos know, or have seen my comments on other videos, the chest articulation I always find is a bit weird. Articulation at the waist, yeah, sure. You know, because obviously we as people can swing from the waist, but some of these figures that I've seen have sort of chest pieces that are separate as well, which I always find a little bit odd. But you know, as a whole, I can see why there would be an argument to say, you know, go bigger, because you'll have more presence, but then you can't get as many on the shelf. So from a toy store point of view, is that desirable? I don't know. What's the sweet spot, you know? Because obviously, you know, the Star Wars figures sold incredibly well. That's why there's so many of them still around, logically. Whereas others, as you can see here, I've still got in packets from nearly 40 years ago. So it's kind of, well, okay, so why weren't they as attractive? Now, obviously, the actual show they're derived from may have a factor there, inevitably. But then a lot of them didn't necessarily have cartoons to back them up. So I'd be interested to hear in the comments what you think makes a good action figure. You know, is the size even vaguely a consideration for you? Is it how well they display? Is it how well they survive interacting with other action figures? Is it the fact that they've got a good vehicle range to put themselves into Was that important for you? Was it more important just to have good action figures? Because I think of myself a bit more as a vehicles kind of person. I enjoy the futuristic vehicles side of things, probably more so. And that's why I like Transformers, because Transformers were vehicles that often were either, if not futuristic, then they were good representations of current vehicles. So I could go with that, definitely. But, the question is there for you as the audience. It's sort of what is it that sort of drove you to collect particular things? Was it purely the quality of the figures? Was it their size? Was it the vehicles that were available for them? All that sort of stuff. What was your motivation? And interestingly, I'm just looking at this now, and I'm just thinking there are no female figures here at all. Nothing I've picked up is a female figure. In fact, Visionaries were due to get some, I believe, but in the end didn't. They would have been in a sort of second wave of releases. So, what would when you were a girl, what did you want to see? What was it? Did you have did you want action figures and were disappointed that you didn't get them? Or, it's kind of interesting because I was trying to think about the series that did. Marvel have done some, because obviously there are X-Men and the like who are female. I'm even looking at a Xena Warrior the Princess figure from afar at this point. So I guess, they did get action figure releases, yes. I'm just chuckling to myself, actually, because another thing has caught my eye, which I'm going to get down. Ugh. I'm just thinking that if you put him into the mix as an example of an outlier. Now you see, is Megabyte here from Reboot? Is he an action figure, or is he a figurine? Because he's huge. He's huge, and I've never actually got him out. But he's got a lot of articulation. He's got elbows. He's got shoulders. He's hips like they do something. Yeah. So he looks like he could well be played with, and yet he's clearly sort of stood on a stand with a background and so on. And is that the sort of thing you'd be more interested in? And I noticed that a lot of the I think the videos that Mark's done with the Transformers of late, and I noticed this when I got Ravage as a reissue. They come with backgrounds, so I wonder if the background display thing is an element to people's buying decisions as well. But is that for the older collector rather than the young kids who are getting? Are young kids getting action figures these days? I do see Fortnite figures around. I've never ever picked one up. Well, no, that's a bit of a fib, because I have picked some up for my son before now, but just as a sort of a joke purchase rather than him collecting them or playing with them, really. So I just wonder, I don't know what are people's motivations these days in terms of what they're looking for from action figures, and is size the main thing, or is it packaging, is it accessories they come with as well? Because look at Bridger here. Even though these have very little to do with the actual show, he's got a shed load of guns and a sort of a stand and stuff down the side. So fair dues, although I know only a few people will remember Sequest, that as a sort of as a toy setup, I find quite impressive, because it's been well thought through. In fact, he's I'm trying to remember who produced him. Yes, he's Playmates, so he's not dissimilar to the Star Trek figures from back in the day. That he's that sort of, he's got that level of articulation. I don't actually know when he was produced. He must have been in the 90s, because we're looking at 1993. But it was good, they actually did quite a decent sort of range of action figures, including a dolphin. It's fair dues to them. So it's just one of those little sort of quirks, and I dare say I'm hoping that there'll have been some chat around this, and I'll be interested to see what people think. Really, it's more of a video to prompt discussion, this one, as much as anything else. It's what sort of drives you, what's your minimum level articulation that you want, that sort of stuff, you know? So let me know in the comments anyway, and I'll leave this one for now. Cheers.